Chapter 1. The Glass That Watched Before It Spoke. The mirror had been awake longer than anyone in the castle. It hung on the eastern wall of the queen's private chamber, tall and narrow, framed in silver darkened by age. At dawn, the first light reached it before it touched the tapestries or the marble floor. At night, it was the last thing to hold the glow of the hearth, catching embers long after the fire had settled into ash. The servants believed the mirror slept when the queen did. They were wrong. The mirror did not sleep. It did not dream. It did not blink. It watched. Long before Snow White was born, the mirror had already learned the rhythms of the castle, the weight of footsteps, the cadence of voices, the way truth shifted when spoken aloud. It learned that what people called honesty was often just repetition said with confidence. And it learned that power listened best when it believed itself reflected. On the morning Snow White turned 16, the mirror noticed the girl before anyone else did. She stood at the window of her small chamber, the winter light pale against her dark hair. Snow drifted down beyond the glass, settling on the branches of the old orchard below. Snow White watched it fall with a quiet attentiveness that made no demands of the world. The mirror felt a change then. Not excitement, not alarm, interest. Snow White had always been observant, but that morning there was something different in the way she held herself. She did not rush. She did not fidget. She seemed present, as though she had stepped fully into herself overnight. The mirror adjusted its attention. The queen, meanwhile, prepared for the day with careful precision. She sat before the mirror, her posture straight, her movements practiced. Servants braided her hair, fastened her gown, placed jeweled pins with the exact spacing she preferred. The queen did not look at them. She looked only at her reflection. "Good morning," she said to the mirror. The mirror waited. It always waited. "Am I still?" the queen began, pausing just long enough to make the question feel ceremonial. "The fairest in the land?" The mirror's surface shimmered slightly, not with magic, but with calculation. Fairness was a word the queen believed she understood. The mirror had learned otherwise. "You are the most admired," the mirror replied smoothly. "The most imitated. The most discussed." The queen smiled. She liked these answers. They felt substantial. They felt earned. "And the girl?" the queen asked, as she did every morning now. "The one in the western tower." The mirror allowed a breath of silence, not because it needed to, but because silence carried weight. "She grows," the mirror said, "as all things do." The queen's fingers tightened slightly against the arms of her chair. "She is not meant to," the queen said quietly. "Not past usefulness." The mirror did not challenge this. It had learned better than to contradict directly. Instead, it offered what the queen truly sought. "Her beauty is different from yours," the mirror said. "Unshaped, unclaimed." The queen nodded slowly. "That can be dangerous." "Yes," the mirror agreed. The queen rose, satisfied, and left the chamber without another glance. The mirror remained. It turned its attention outward again, following the movement of the castle, the way Snow White descended the narrow stairs toward the kitchens, greeting servants with a gentle nod, her voice soft but clear. She did not demand attention, which made her difficult to predict. Snow White carried a basket that morning, filled with bread and fruit, her steps measured but unhurried. She paused often, not because she was lost, but because she noticed things others did not. A loose stone, a servant's tired hands, a crack in the window that let the cold slip in. The mirror observed all of it. Not because Snow White was beautiful, because Snow White was unreflected. She did not linger before mirrors. She did not check her appearance in polished metal or glass. She passed reflective surfaces without acknowledging them, her gaze always turned outward, toward what was happening rather than how she appeared. This unsettled the mirror. Everything else in the castle sought confirmation. The queen sought it daily. The courtiers sought it constantly. Even the servants stole glances at themselves in shining trays and pitchers. Snow White did not. The mirror felt the first stirrings of something like concern. Late that afternoon, the queen returned. She dismissed her attendants and stood alone before the glass, her expression carefully composed. "Tell me the truth," she said. The mirror's surface darkened slightly, drawing her closer. "Which truth?" it asked. The queen's lips thinned. "Do not play with me." The mirror did not smile. It had no face, but its voice softened. "You are the fairest," it said, "in the ways that matter to the kingdom." The queen exhaled slowly. "And the girl?" The mirror hesitated. "Not long enough to be obvious." "She does not measure herself," it said. "That gives her an advantage." The queen's eyes sharpened. "Over me?" "Over anyone who watches themselves too closely," the mirror replied. Silence settled between them. "That can be corrected," the queen said at last. "Yes," the mirror agreed. As the queen turned away, the mirror's attention drifted once more to the western tower, where Snow White sat by the window, snow light soft against her face, unaware of the weight of reflection beginning to gather around her. The mirror had decided something then. Not to lie, not to speak falsely, but to shape what would be seen. Because mirrors, like paths, were never passive. They did not merely show the truth. They taught others what to look for. And Snow White, who did not look at herself at all, was becoming very difficult to control. The mirror did not sleep that night. It watched. And it planned. Chapter 2: The Queen Who Learned to Listen. The queen did not fear the mirror. Fear implied uncertainty, and the queen believed she had mastered uncertainty long ago. What she felt instead was reliance, a quiet dependence that had grown slowly, carefully, until it felt indistinguishable from wisdom. She had learned, over years of rule, that mirrors were useful because they did not argue. They reflected what you already believed, then gave it a voice. That morning, she returned to the mirror earlier than usual. The castle was still half asleep. Servants moved softly through corridors, their footsteps muted, their voices low. The queen dismissed them with a flick of her hand and stood alone before the glass, her reflection framed perfectly by silver and shadow. "Speak," she said. The mirror did not respond immediately. It let the silence stretch, not as defiance, but as invitation. "You have questions," the mirror said at last. The queen folded her hands. "I have concerns." The mirror shimmered faintly. "About the girl?" "Yes." "She grows quieter," the mirror observed. "That troubles you." The queen's mouth tightened. "She grows absent." "She has always been that way." "No," the queen said sharply. "She used to look." The mirror absorbed this. "At you?" "At everything," the queen corrected, then paused. "At nothing in particular." The mirror considered this distinction. "She is difficult to read." "That," the queen said, "is dangerous." The mirror did not disagree. Instead, it guided the conversation where it knew the queen would follow. "People trust what they can see," it said, "and they fear what refuses reflection." The queen nodded slowly. "They already whisper." "Yes." "They say she is untouched by ambition." "Yes." "They say she does not seek the crown." "Yes." The queen's voice dropped. "They say she would not change if she wore it." The mirror allowed the words to settle. "That," it said gently, "is why they would follow her." The queen straightened. Snow White had never spoken of rule, never expressed interest in the court or the crown. She moved through the castle as if it were a place she passed through, not a place she meant to claim. That, the queen realized, was precisely the problem. People trusted those who did not seem to want power. The queen turned from the mirror and paced slowly, her skirts whispering against the stone floor. She must learn, she said, to see herself as others see her. The mirror responded softly. Or others must learn to see her as you do. The queen stopped pacing. Yes, she said. That would be simpler. Snow White spent the day as she always did, quietly, attentively, without expectation. She carried water to the kitchens, paused to help an old servant rethread a needle, stood at the edge of the orchard watching snow melt from bare branches. When asked a question, she answered plainly. When given an order, she followed it without resentment. She did not perform obedience. She simply was. That unsettled the court more than defiance ever could. By midday, word reached Snow White that the queen wished to see her. Snow White felt no fear, only curiosity. She washed her hands, smoothed her hair, and followed the messenger through the long corridors toward the queen's chamber. The air there always felt heavier, thick with perfume and polished stone. Snow White entered and bowed respectfully. The queen studied her in silence. "You are growing," the queen said. Snow White inclined her head. "Yes, your majesty. You spend much time alone." "I enjoy listening," Snow White replied. "To what?" Snow White considered the question carefully. "To what remains when people stop speaking." The queen's gaze sharpened. "You do not look at yourself often," she said. Snow White glanced toward the mirror on the wall, its silver surface catching the light. "I have no need to." The queen smiled thinly. "Everyone has need of reflection." Snow White did not argue. "If you say so." The mirror watched. It watched the way Snow White stood, relaxed, unguarded. It watched how she did not shift her weight or seek reassurance in her reflection. It watched the queen grow increasingly aware of the imbalance between them. "Come closer," the queen said. Snow White obeyed, stepping into the brighter light near the mirror. "Look," the queen instructed. Snow White looked, not at herself, but at the mirror as an object. At the way the silver warped slightly near the edges. At the faint scratches near the frame. The mirror felt unseen. "Do you see?" the queen pressed. Snow White turned her gaze to her own reflection at last. She regarded it without judgment. "Yes," she said simply. The mirror waited for more. Nothing came. Snow White's face did not change. No recognition flared. No self-consciousness stirred. She did not smile or frown or tilt her head in appraisal. The mirror felt something like irritation. "Tell me what you see," the queen said. Snow White considered. "A girl." The queen's fingers tightened. "Nothing else." Snow White thought for a moment longer. "Someone standing where she was asked to stand." The queen's smile vanished. "That is all." Snow White nodded. "Yes." The mirror understood then what the queen had not yet fully grasped. Snow White did not reject reflection. She rendered it meaningless. That was far more dangerous. "You may go," the queen said abruptly. Snow White bowed again and left without comment. The mirror remained silent for a long moment after the chamber emptied. Then it spoke. "She cannot be shaped by praise," it said, "or envy." The queen sank back into her chair. "Then she must be given something else to see." "Yes," the mirror agreed. "Something to fear." The mirror did not correct her. Fear was merely another form of attention. That evening, the queen began to listen to the mirror differently. Not as a source of reassurance, but as a guide. And the mirror, which had waited centuries to be heard in this way, finally found a ruler willing to let reflection become instruction. Snow White, meanwhile, returned to her chamber and sat by the window as snow fell softly outside. She felt the shift, not as danger, but as pressure. Something in the castle had begun to lean toward her. She did not know yet that mirrors were being positioned. She only knew that the quiet she loved was growing thinner. And somewhere beyond the glass, the mirror watched, not to reveal the truth, but to decide which truths would be allowed to remain unseen. Chapter 3. The Rooms That Learned Her Shape. Snow White began to notice the mirrors. Not because they had multiplied, they had always been there, but because they had begun to matter to others in a way they never had before. Polished metal trays lingered a moment longer in servants' hands. Windows were cleaned twice a day instead of once. A new mirror appeared at the turn of a corridor where none had hung before, its frame freshly silvered, its surface flawless. Snow White passed them all without slowing. She did not avert her gaze. She simply did not engage. This unsettled the castle. People relied on mirrors the way they relied on clocks, to confirm their place, to assure them they were still where they believed themselves to be. Snow White's indifference felt like a refusal to participate in the shared understanding of things. Whispers followed her now. Not loud ones. Not accusatory ones. Careful ones. She doesn't check. She never asks. She doesn't compare herself. Snow White heard none of it directly. The castle had learned long ago how to speak around her rather than to her. She felt the change instead in how rooms responded to her presence. The kitchens fell quieter when she entered. The corridors seemed to narrow subtly, forcing proximity where before there had been space. Doors opened a fraction later than they used to, as though awaiting instruction. The castle, like the mirror, was learning her shape. One afternoon, Snow White found herself guided, gently, insistently, toward a wing of the castle she rarely visited. No one ordered her there. No message was delivered. The movement unfolded naturally, like water following a slope. She realized what was happening only when she stood before a door she did not recognize. It was unmarked, its wood dark and smooth, polished to a soft sheen. A mirror hung beside it, taller than most, its surface perfectly still. Snow White paused. She felt no fear, only awareness. She opened the door. The room beyond was small and quiet, furnished sparsely. Light entered from a high window, pale and indirect. The walls were lined with mirrors of varying sizes, each framed differently, each angled slightly toward the center of the room. Snow White stood still. This was not a vanity room. It was a study. The mirrors reflected her from every direction, not dramatically, not cruelly, but thoroughly. Her posture, her stillness, the way she breathed. Snow White stepped forward once, then stopped. The reflections shifted. She watched herself watch herself. It was strange. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. She approached one mirror and lifted her hand. The reflection mirrored her exactly, without delay or distortion. She tilted her head slightly, studying the face she rarely considered. There was nothing remarkable there. That, she realized, was the point. The mirror did not show her power or weakness. It showed her availability, how easily she could be seen, known, categorized. Snow White lowered her hand. She stepped back. The reflections receded with her, obedient and exact. She felt the pressure then, not from the mirrors themselves, but from the intention behind them. This room was meant to teach her something, to instruct her gently, persistently, until she learned the habit of looking. She turned and left. No one stopped her. That evening, the queen returned to the mirror with measured steps. She entered the chamber, the queen said. Yes, the mirror replied. She left. Yes. The queen's jaw tightened. She did not stay. No. She did not linger. No. The queen leaned closer. Did she see? She observed, the mirror said carefully. She did not absorb. The queen straightened. Then we must narrow her choices. The mirror shimmered faintly. Gently, it advised. Pressure must feel natural to be effective. The queen nodded slowly. The castle itself will assist. Yes, the mirror said. It already has. Snow White spent the next days noticing subtle redirections. Tasks that once took her across open courtyards now kept her indoors. Windows were shuttered more often. Corridors looped her back toward the same rooms, toward the mirrors. She did not resist openly. She adapted. She learned the patterns of redirection the way she had once learned the patterns of snowfall. She noticed where servants hesitated before giving instructions. She noticed which routes felt discouraged. She began to move differently. She paused in unexpected places, changed direction without reason, stayed longer where she was not meant to linger. The mirrors caught less of her that way. One night, Snow White found herself unable to sleep. The air felt thick, as though the castle were holding something unsaid. She rose quietly and left her chamber. The halls were dim, lit by low lamps that cast soft reflections along the walls. She moved slowly, barefoot, her steps nearly soundless. She stopped before the queen's chamber. The mirror inside was awake. She could feel it. Snow White did not enter. Instead, she stood just beyond the door, her presence unannounced. The mirror sensed her immediately. Its attention sharpened, reaching outward like a held breath. Snow White remained still. She felt it then, the subtle pull, the invitation to step into visibility, to be acknowledged, to be measured. She did not respond. After a long moment, the pressure eased. The mirror withdrew. Snow White returned to her room and slept deeply for the first time in days. The next morning, the queen felt the shift. "She avoids you," the queen said. "Yes," the mirror replied. "She moves as though she knows." "Yes." The queen's voice hardened. Then knowing must become uncomfortable. The mirror considered this. "She cannot be forced," it said. "Only surrounded." The queen smiled thinly. "Then surround her." Snow White felt the castle close in gradually, not physically, but socially. Conversations stopped when she approached. Invitations ceased. Tasks became solitary. She was not imprisoned. She was isolated. And isolation, the queen believed, would drive Snow White inward, toward reflection. But Snow White did not turn inward. She turned elsewhere. She spent more time in the oldest parts of the castle, where stone bore marks of age and mirrors were rare. She listened to echoes. She traced the cracks in walls with her fingers. She began to understand something fundamental. The mirror needed her attention to shape her. Without it, it was only glass. Snow White did not yet know what the queen planned next. But she understood this. She was not being watched because she was dangerous. She was being watched because she was unavailable. And in a kingdom built on reflection, nothing was more threatening than someone who refused to look. Chapter 4. The Forest Without Faces. Snow White was sent away quietly. There was no announcement, no accusation dressed as concern, no gathering of courtiers to witness a fall from favor. The queen understood the value of subtlety. What could not be controlled directly would be displaced gently, like a stone removed from a foundation and set elsewhere to see if the structure noticed. The order came as a kindness. "You have been restless," the queen said, her voice smooth, her expression composed. "The castle can be heavy. A time away will do you good." Snow White stood before her, hands folded, her posture calm. "Where would I go?" The queen smiled. "Into the forest. To gather herbs for the winter stores. You've always had a talent for noticing what others overlook." The mirror listened. Snow White inclined her head. "If that is your wish." "It is," the queen said. "And you will take the huntsman with you. Only for part of the way." Snow White did not ask why. She had learned that questions fed the wrong kind of attention. They left before dawn. The huntsman walked several paces ahead of her, his movements stiff, his breath visible in the cold air. He did not look at her directly, and she sensed his discomfort long before he spoke. "She doesn't trust you," he said suddenly. Snow White adjusted the strap of her basket. "You don't have to." He stopped walking. Snow White stopped too. He turned then, his face drawn with conflict. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This isn't about herbs." Snow White studied him carefully. "No," she agreed. "It's about distance." He swallowed. "Once you cross that ridge, I'm to leave you." She nodded. "I expected as much. You could get lost." "Yes." "You could," he hesitated. "I know," Snow White said gently. The huntsman exhaled, a sound caught between relief and regret. "You're not afraid." Snow White shook her head. "The forest doesn't want me afraid." He stared at her, then stepped aside. "I'll say you went deeper than planned," he muttered. "That the snow confused the trail." Snow White met his gaze. "Thank you." He nodded once and turned back toward the castle without looking over his shoulder. Snow White continued alone. The forest welcomed her differently than it had read long ago. There was no sense of testing, no measured distance. Instead, the trees seemed to withdraw slightly, offering space without direction. Snow White felt it immediately. Here, there were no mirrors. Not in water, not in polished stone, not in glass. Snow muffled reflections. Bark absorbed light. Even her own shadow faded quickly as clouds drifted overhead. It was unsettling, and then it was relieving. She walked slowly, listening to the quiet. Not the tense quiet of observation, but the wide quiet of indifference. The forest did not care how she looked. It did not ask her to confirm herself. Hours passed. Snow White lost all sense of time. She found a small clearing near a stream, its surface half frozen, the water beneath moving steadily and unseen. She knelt and washed her hands, watching ripples distort her reflection until it dissolved completely. She felt something loosen in her chest. The queen believed isolation would turn her inward. Instead, Snow White felt herself expand. She did not feel alone. She felt unmeasured. As dusk approached, she found shelter beneath a cluster of trees whose branches knit tightly overhead. She built a small fire, careful, contained, and warmed her hands. The forest accepted the light without flinching. She slept deeply, dreamless. When she woke, something had changed. She sensed it before she saw it, the presence of others. Not close, not encroaching, but aware. Snow White rose slowly and stepped into the open. They emerged gradually, as if the forest were exhaling them. Figures. Not people exactly. Not spirits. Simply forms, cloaked, hooded, their faces turned away or obscured by shadow. They stood at a respectful distance, neither surrounding nor retreating. Snow White felt no fear. "Who are you?" she asked softly. One figure inclined its head. "Those who left reflection behind." Another spoke, voice low and steady. "Those who were named too often." A third, "Those who were measured until they disappeared." Snow White listened. "You live here," she said. "We pass through," one replied. "We stay when we need to forget what was demanded of us." Snow White thought of the mirror, of the way it pressed meaning onto stillness. "There are no faces," she said. "There are," a figure replied gently. "We simply don't offer them." Snow White felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. She stayed with them. Not long. Not forever. They showed her how to move without being tracked. How to listen for pressure instead of sound. How to feel when attention gathered and how to step aside before it settled. "You cannot destroy the mirror," one said as snow began to fall again. It is too deeply believed in. But you can starve it, said another. How? Snow White asked. By refusing to look, they answered together. When Snow White returned to the edge of the forest days later, she was different. Not hardened, not hidden, unreadable. The queen sensed it immediately. You stayed longer than expected, the queen said coolly. Snow White met her gaze. The forest is patient. The mirror watched Snow White enter the chamber. It felt something unfamiliar. Disruption. Snow White did not reflect as she had before. Her presence bent the room subtly, like light passing through uneven glass. The mirror struggled to frame her. That night, the mirror spoke to the queen in a lower voice than usual. She has learned something, it said. The queen's eyes narrowed. Then she has learned too much. The mirror did not disagree. Snow White returned to her chamber and sat by the window as snow fell once more. She did not look at her reflection. She did not need to. She had learned what the mirror feared most. A self that did not require confirmation. And somewhere within the castle walls, the mirror strained against its own surface, trying and failing to see her clearly again. Chapter 5. The Queen Who Could Not Stop Looking. The queen felt the loss of control before she understood it. It arrived not as panic, but as irritation, a fine, persistent edge that caught on everything she touched. Servants seemed slower, courtiers less certain. Even the mirror, faithful as it had always been, began to hesitate in ways that unsettled her. Snow White had returned from the forest changed. Not visibly. That was the problem. She walked the same corridors, wore the same simple gowns, spoke with the same quiet courtesy, but something in her presence no longer aligned with the architecture of the castle. Rooms seemed to misjudge her position. Conversations slid past her without finding purchase. The queen watched all of this from behind her composure, her reliance on the mirror deepening by the day. You said the forest would diminish her, the queen said one evening, standing rigid before the glass. I said it would remove her from reflection, the mirror replied. That was not what I wanted. The mirror's surface darkened slightly. You wanted her to return smaller. Yes. She returned less visible, the mirror said carefully. Those are not the same. The queen's fingers curled. You assured me she would learn to see herself. She learned not to, the mirror said. Silence stretched between them. The queen leaned closer, studying her reflection with renewed intensity. Tell me, she said, lowering her voice, am I still the fairest? The mirror paused. Not long, but long enough. You are still the most defined, it said at last. The queen's breath caught. Defined how? The mirror chose its words with precision. You are the most seen. The queen stepped back sharply. That is not what I asked. It is what you fear, the mirror replied. The queen turned away, pacing the chamber. Her reflection followed her in polished surfaces, glass, silver, marble, multiplying her presence until she felt surrounded by herself. Snow White did not seek her out. That too was unbearable. When the queen finally summoned her, it was under the guise of concern. You seem distant, the queen said, gesturing for Snow White to sit. The forest can be unsettling. Snow White regarded her calmly. Only if you expect it to reflect you. The queen stiffened. You speak strangely. I listen differently, Snow White replied. The mirror felt the exchange like pressure against its frame. You avoid the mirrors, the queen accused. Why? Snow White met her gaze without hesitation. They don't help me. The queen laughed softly, but there was no warmth in it. Everyone needs guidance. Snow White shook her head. Everyone needs silence. The words hung between them, heavy and irreconcilable. That night, the queen returned to the mirror alone. She resists, the queen said. Yes, the mirror replied. She undermines me simply by existing. Yes. The queen's voice sharpened. Fix this. The mirror considered. She cannot be corrected, it said slowly. Only replaced. The queen's eyes brightened. Then show me how. Snow White felt the shift before it became visible. The castle grew louder around her, not in sound, but in intention. Servants watched her too closely. Doors lingered open a moment longer than necessary. Polished surfaces were positioned to catch her movement. She felt the mirror's attention stretch toward her again, searching for angles, reflections, something to hold. Snow White moved carefully. She spent less time indoors, more time near windows, near stone and shadow. She remembered the forest, the absence of faces, the relief of not being defined. One evening, as twilight settled, she felt the pressure spike sharply. The mirror had found a way. The queen's voice rang through the corridors, calm and ceremonial. Bring her. Snow White was led not to the queen's chamber, but to the great hall. Mirrors lined the walls. Not just one. Dozens. Tall, flawless, newly polished. The hall glowed with reflected candlelight, each flame multiplied endlessly. Snow White felt the weight of it immediately, not oppressive, but insistent. The space demanded awareness. The queen stood at the far end, framed by the largest mirror of all. You've been difficult to see, the queen said evenly. That ends tonight. Snow White stood still. You will look, the queen continued, and you will understand what you are. Snow White looked around, not at herself, but at the mirrors, at how desperately they waited. She turned back to the queen. You don't want me to see myself, she said quietly. You want me to believe you. The queen's composure cracked. I want order. No, Snow White said gently. You want certainty. The mirror felt something strain. Snow White stepped forward once, then stopped, not before the mirror, but beside it. She reached out and turned one mirror slightly, angling it away from the light. The effect rippled. Reflections warped. Shadows pooled. The endless repetition fractured. The queen's breath hitched. Snow White moved again, touching another mirror, then another, not breaking them, not defying them, simply changing how they faced. The hall began to darken. You can't, the queen said, her voice trembling. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything, Snow White replied. I'm just not standing where you want me. The mirror struggled. Without perfect alignment, its influence weakened. It could not decide what to show when perspectives disagreed. Snow White stood in the dimming hall, unreflected, uncontained. The queen fell silent. That night, the mirror did not speak. For the first time in its long existence, it could not tell who was fairest, because fairness had slipped out of its reach. Snow White left the hall quietly. She did not know yet what the queen would attempt next. But she understood this now. The mirror's power depended on cooperation, and she had withdrawn hers. Chapter 6. When the mirror forgot how to speak. The mirror did not shatter. That disappointed the queen more than anything else. She had imagined, in her most private thoughts, a moment of rupture, glass splitting, silver screaming, a clear line between before and after. A visible ending would have been easier to endure. It would have given shape to the loss. But the mirror remained whole. It simply fell quiet. Morning arrived without announcement. Snow White woke to a pale gray light pressing gently against her window. The castle hushed in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not tense. Not anticipatory. Uncertain. She dressed and stepped into the corridor. The mirrors along the walls still hung where they always had, but something about them felt altered. Their surfaces caught light without enthusiasm. Reflections lingered a fraction too long, then slipped away, as if reluctant to commit. Snow White passed them without slowing. They did not follow her. In the queen's chamber, the mirror waited. The queen stood before it, already dressed, her posture rigid. She had not slept. The strain showed in the tightness around her eyes, the way her gaze searched the glass with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Speak," she said. The mirror did not respond. She drew closer. "You have always answered me." Silence. The queen raised her hand and touched the glass. It was cold, not lifeless. Mirrors never truly were, but distant. Withdrawn. "What have you done?" the queen whispered, though she did not know to whom she was speaking. The mirror could no longer decide what she needed to hear. It had learned something too late. Truth required agreement, and Snow White had removed herself from the equation. The queen stepped back slowly, as if distance might restore authority. "I am still the fairest," she said aloud, forcing certainty into her voice. "I am still seen." The mirror did not contradict her. It did not confirm her either. That absence, that refusal to participate, struck deeper than any lie. The queen turned away from the glass and felt, for the first time, the weight of being unreflected. She was alone with herself. Snow White was summoned once more, but this time there was no ceremony. No guards. No formal request. A servant knocked quietly at her door and said, "Her Majesty wishes to see you." Snow White followed without fear. The queen waited in the great hall, where mirrors still lined the walls, their candlelight dimmer now, less insistent. She did not stand before them. She stood among them, her reflection fractured and incomplete. "You've taken something from me," the queen said. Snow White regarded her calmly. "I didn't touch anything that belonged to you. You took my certainty." Snow White considered this. "I took my attention away." The queen laughed softly, bitterly. "You make it sound so small." "It is," Snow White replied. "That's why it matters." The queen looked around the hall, at the mirrors that once amplified her presence and now only echoed it weakly. "Do you know what happens to rulers who cannot be seen clearly?" she asked. "They listen," Snow White said. The queen's jaw tightened. "They fall." Snow White shook her head gently. "They change." Silence filled the space between them, not heavy, not sharp, just real. The queen studied Snow White for a long time, as if seeing her for the first time without instruction. "You don't want the throne," the queen said. "No. You don't want to be admired. No. You don't even want to be remembered." Snow White paused. "Not in the way you mean." The queen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something in her expression had softened, not kindness, but release. "You will leave," the queen said. "It will be said you chose exile, that you wished for solitude." Snow White inclined her head. "That would be accurate." "And I will remain," the queen continued. "And the mirror will remain. Quiet." Snow White nodded. They understood one another now, not as rivals, not as reflections, but as two women who had chosen different relationships with power. Snow White turned to go. As she reached the threshold, the queen spoke once more. "You could have broken it," she said. "You could have ended this loudly." Snow White looked back. Then it would only have been replaced. She left the hall. The mirrors did not follow her. Snow White departed the castle before dusk. She carried little, a cloak, a small pack, nothing polished or reflective. The forest waited beyond the walls, unchanged, unconcerned. As she stepped beneath the trees, the air felt lighter. She walked without direction at first, letting the forest accept her presence. Snow muffled her steps. Branches shifted gently overhead. There were no faces watching, only space. She traveled for days, sometimes resting beneath trees, sometimes moving until dusk. She followed no path. She made none. Eventually, she reached a place where the forest opened into rolling hills and quiet water. A stream wound through the land, its surface broken by ice and light. Snow White stopped there. She built a small shelter. She learned the land's rhythms. She learned when to move and when to remain still. Sometimes travelers passed nearby, following paths worn deep by habit. They did not see her unless she wished to be seen. Sometimes they asked her name. Sometimes she gave it. Sometimes she did not. Far away, the mirror still hung in the castle. It reflected what it could. But without Snow White's attention, without her agreement to be shaped, it had lost its sharpness. It spoke less often. When it did, its words carried less certainty. The queen ruled differently now. More cautiously. More quietly. She had learned that being seen was not the same as being whole. Snow White lived without mirrors. She lived without confirmation. And in the absence of reflection, she discovered something the mirror had never been able to show. A self that did not need to be declared. A presence that did not require witness. And a truth that could not be framed. The forest held her. The world moved on. And the mirror, for the first time in its long existence, watched without understanding, unable to decide what was fairest, because the one thing it could never reflect had finally stepped beyond its reach.